As a project manager, there are 3 words that we fear more than any other, because our project is going well and someone comes up to us and says, "Could you just?" Could you just are the 3 words that mean somebody wants something extra from your project, and that opens the door to one of the most dangerous things in project management: scope creep. So in this video, I want to look at how you can prevent scope creep. The reason why scope creep is so dangerous is easy to understand if we look at a simple graph. This graph represents the progress of your project. Going from the start to the end of your project, it goes from 0 to 100% completion. It also represents the usage of your resources, be they hours of people's time, materials, or budget. Once again, it goes from 0 to 100%, and it typically follows this kind of S-curve. What's important about this curve is what happens if you subtract it from 100% to give you the curve for the depletion of your resources, the amount of resource you have remaining, which will now go from 100 to 0%. The danger of scope creep is that once you move past the initial stage of your project, you're using resources very quickly. That means that if someone tries to add additional scope to your project, you rapidly find that you don't have the resources you need to accommodate that change of scope without having a significant impact on the deliverability of your project and on your ability to deliver that project to time and within budget. Therefore, scope creep is dangerous, and we must do what we can to control it. The basic approach to controlling scope creep is a 2-step process, and step 1 is to define your scope with precision. If this circle represents the complete scope of your project, with everything inside the circle being the things that are in scope for your project and everything outside the circle being out of scope, your first job is to characterize that boundary. To define your scope with precision, you must not only articulate precisely what is in scope for your project, but you must also anticipate the could-you-justs that lead to things falling out of scope. So document a list of out-of-scope items as well, the exclusions from your project. Once you have all that documented, the second stage of the process is to take that to your boss, to your project sponsor, to your steering group, or to your client. Show them your documentation of what you believe is in scope and what is out of scope, and ask them the simple question: if we deliver everything that is in scope to the budget given us, to the time specified, and to the quality standards you require, will you be happy? And if we deliver none of the exclusions, will you be happy? If they say yes, then get them to sign to show that they authorize your scope statement. Once they've done that, then when someone comes up to you and says, "Hey, Mike, could you just?" you can look them in the eye and say, "I'm sorry. I wish I could, but I can't, because my boss, my client, my sponsor has signed to specify that this is the scope I must deliver." Now, the thing is, I'm not naive. I know there is a tendency within your organization and many others to play a game that I call autograph top trumps. That's to say, my boss's signature is better than your boss's signature. But even if that happens, because you've done the work of documenting precisely what is in and out of scope, and therefore what your sponsor will get for their money and in the time available, you have a firm baseline from which to negotiate changes to scope. Because this other person has a more senior role than your boss, than your sponsor, they can authorize the removal of items from scope in order to accommodate their desired changes. Or they can authorize the additional budget or the additional time to add those extra scope items to your project. The second thing I'd say is that in order to control scope, you need to get it right the first time. That's to say, you need to be excellent at requirements gathering, understanding the needs of the different stakeholders, and then conducting a negotiation among those stakeholders to balance the desires of one stakeholder with the needs of another, and the needs of a third stakeholder with the preferences of yet another. One of the most valuable tools that you can use to help you do that is Moscow analysis. An analysis of the musts, the shoulds, the coulds, and the won'ts among scope options, and we have a video describing that in detail. Once you've conducted that negotiation and recognized that you can please all of the people some of the time and some of the people all of the time, but you can't please all of your stakeholders all of the time, once you've conducted that negotiation, it's essential then to document that carefully, to make sure that the requirements are reflected by a statement of scope, and that statement of scope is properly documented and signed off. But remember, preventing scope creep is not always your objective, because the world changes, the needs of stakeholders changes, the competitive environment changes, technology changes, legislation changes, everything changes. And to be dogmatic and to say, no, we are not going to change the scope of this project ever, is just foolish. There are two main solutions to this problem, and the first is a structured change control process. And again, we have videos on controlling change and a long form article on our website. Change control is the process whereby you control requests for change, and you make sure that each request for change is supported by evidence of need and by a statement of benefits to match up against the costs. The other approach is to recognize that some projects are inherently uncertain at the outset. We don't know for sure what the right solution is going to look like. Maybe the problem isn't fully characterized. And that's where the agile style of project and hybrids between agile and the more traditional predictive approach to project management really come into their own, because these approaches allow us to iterate and successively redefine our scope in a controlled way. Your objective is not to prevent changes in scope or scope creep. Your objective is to control it, to manage the process, and to ensure that there is good governance around any scope changes. And good governance means a proper consideration of the value of any changes you make. A third approach, suitable for more traditional predictive project management, is to recognize that significant changes of scope can be accommodated by a second or a third phase of your project, a version 2 of the product you're producing perhaps. This is a way of incorporating some of the ideas of agile into a more traditional project structure. So, the answer to the question how to prevent scope creep is by careful definition of scope and careful management of the approval of that scope, but remembering that preventing scope creep isn't your prime objective, it's controlling it. As with everything in project management, bringing it under control is what really matters. However you choose to manage it, controlling scope creep is vital, because uncontrolled scope creep is a killer of good projects. Please give us a thumbs up if you like this video. I'll be producing loads more great project management content, so please subscribe to our channel and hit the bell so you don't miss any of it. And I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video. So, to answer the question how to prevent stroke bloke